This podcast talks candidly and openly about issues of male sexual violence. A full list of topics can be found in the episode description. Hello and welcome to Beyond the Silence, the official podcast of We Are Survivors. My name is George. I'll be your host for today. I'm very, very glad to have you here. So in this podcast, we create a safe space for male survivors of rape and sexual abuse. We talk about the work we offer here at We Are Survivors, of course, and the support we offer to people in our community. Today, we'll be starting off with an interview with our very special guest, who is Christopher, a member of our community development team. Later, we'll actually look in what we call our activity spotlight and focus in on one of our very specific initiatives and talk about how you can get involved and what we offer there. We'll also be discussing some recent news, so keeping an eye on the issues that are affecting us as a general whole and discussing them further in detail. And then finally, we will go to discussing some letters, stories you've sent in, questions you've asked us here in the community, and we will do our very, very best to answer them. There will, of course, be time codes in the description if you want to jump around, but I thoroughly recommend you stick with us and stay for the whole thing. So if you are sitting comfortably, grab yourself a cup of coffee. Let's begin. So, Christopher, you are a member of our community development team. Your journey into the organization was a fascinating one. I hope we dive into it later. But can you tell us a little bit more about what we do here in the community? A small sort of description of what is the community development team's area of influence? How does it help the guys that we support?
So the community development team are, well, right now the first port of call for the clients. We do quite a lot of the referrals. We'll also be doing all the assessments. And then once a client is assessed, they will find there's quite a lengthy wait for therapy, and that can seem really daunting. You know, when you've reached out for support and you're saying, I need help, generally what you're meaning is, I need help now.
Yeah.
Not next week.
And that's us.
Yeah, that's us. And I think clients envisage the service to be, okay, I need help. Oh, we'll start therapy next week. It's really important that clients are ready for therapy. It's really important that clients are stable. It's really important that also the clients get to know the organisation so they can trust us.
And each other, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one common denominator, I think, between most survivors, I'm not going to say all, is lack of trust. Trust has been broken in their lives severely with catastrophic consequences to that. So it takes a lot to build up that trust. They're not just going to see the name We Are Survivors and immediately think, oh, they're the people for me and they're going to help me. We need to earn that trust. And so we're the first port of call, and we will try and set up a meeting either face-to-face. So they come into the space, they become accustomed to the space. Simple things like working out, how do I get to the space? How do I travel there?
Yeah.
How long does that take? What does that look like? And from then on, once they've been in the space and they've seen the space and hopefully feel safe within that space, they may be more likely to sign up for some of the activities we do.
Yeah, so open to events, things like the art groups, coffee meetings, hang out.
We do lots of things. And the way society works in terms of therapy, I think, and in terms of trauma, is trauma equals therapy. Trauma, to help, to support, to try and diminish that trauma in some way. Therapy is the answer, but that's what we're all told. And don't get me wrong, therapy is an answer. It definitely is. And therapy can be really, really beneficial. But therapy just doesn't happen just like that. And therapy is a finite set of weeks. It's not forever unless you can afford to pay for private therapy. So there are other things that you can do which are equally as beneficial, and there are other things that you can do which really help on that road and that journey of recovery.
Fantastic. So just to open up the floor today, who's someone you draw your kind of inspiration from and why? What kind of helps motivate you in this space to do what you do or outside of it?
Without wanting to seem really arrogant or self-indulgent,
Shoot for it.
The man I see in the mirror in the morning. I remember I have photographs of myself when I was at my probably my worst. I have photographs of myself when I used to I used to self-harm, and I used to self-harm in I used to self-harm in certain ways that I have photographs of myself during those periods of my life which really, really shine a light on how unwell I was. And now when I look in the mirror, I do recognize who I am. But for a while I didn't, because for a while I saw the person I never thought it was possible to become.
Yeah.
And I've not become that person by myself. A lot of people have held that person up and put that person back together. And that all started with having this sudden desire to be dead without being suicidal, without planning how I was going to do that. It was this realization that everything becomes better if I'm dead. Everything stops being so painful if I'm dead. And I picked up a phone and I phoned a couple of places, and I lived in the wrong postcode. And I phoned up We Are Survivors, and the person on the other end said, "Can you get to us?" And I said, yes.
And that was that.
And I did. And I was so desperate, like so incredibly desperate. And it was the right time in my life. I think if it had been other times in my life, I'd have picked up the phone, I'd have said, yes, I can get to you. And I probably wouldn't have bothered, because the idea of walking through a door and talking about what had happened to me was so terrifying. It was something I never wanted to do. I didn't want anyone else to picture me in those situations or to see those images. I didn't want to paint that picture to anyone, especially not to myself.
Yeah.
So I was sort of I was that desperate that I then became this active participant in my own recovery, which I think is really important.
Yeah.
And I started turning up for myself. So I was really eager to get into anything. The first thing I was offered was art therapy. Last thing I would probably ever envisage myself doing.
Just didn't imagine yourself.
Yeah, and I did it, and then started doing the peer-to-peer support group, the Safe Room, and it was a very long journey, and it was one that was not easy, and it was one that I had to put a lot of work into.
Yeah.
But sometimes sitting in a room and just talking and listening for 2 hours every 2 weeks, while it seems like you're not doing that much, what it's actually allowing you to is breathe, take stock. And, every month when you just see the changes in the mirror, and then every year, and then you go from the client who was desperate to come through the door for help to becoming the employee on the other side of that door who's offering that help.
Who's opening it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what you're talking about there is the Safe Room. We've actually got a letter in later from a client who wants to ask us about how the Safe Room works.
Okay.
So I'm excited to talk about that then. How does someone know that it's their right time to talk? What is that moment like? What was it like for you? And how much you recognize in someone else, perhaps a survivor in your life, when that door can be open, when it's not going to sort of be slammed shut by themselves, when they're ready to begin healing?
I think I did art therapy and I was in there with someone who was from a different side of life from me.
Yeah.
Someone who I probably would have never met in any other situation. And they said the word rape, referring to themselves.
Yeah.
I then heard that in the Safe Room. And it's a word I'd never used. It was a word I was terrified of.
Yeah.
It was a word that I felt would remove all elements of masculinity from me if I'd said it out loud.
That's so interesting. Yeah.
And when I said that word for the first time, and it didn't hurt, and the world didn't end, and I felt more masculine than I'd ever felt before, which I'm not saying everyone does. It's a really difficult word. It's still a difficult word when it comes out of my throat now. It hurts as it comes up. It leaves its little scars, but those scars heal quickly, and I always feel lighter when I've said it, because that's exactly what it is, and we shouldn't shy away from that. Society doesn't enjoy that word. Society feels a lot of discomfort with that word, but it's still going on in the manner it's going on because society has been too afraid to bloody face it head on and talk about it.
Yeah. When we talk about making these sort of wider changes and taking the power out of words, looking at breaking the silence, which is what you're talking about, it's acknowledging it and saying words like rape and knowing that there's pain there, but there's power being taken away from it. Was there a specific moment where you can think, I am ready to talk and my experiences no longer have the hold that they perhaps used to have?
I think I'm not shy in talking, but there was a lot of things I talked around. I never wanted to talk about.
Yeah.
And there was sometimes I broke my silence and said things.
Is this in safe rooms?
Yeah,
or?
this would be in the safe room.
Yeah.
And then on the way home would be regretting it because it was out there. I couldn't pull it back in.
Yeah.
But that's part of the process. That's part of processing it.
Yeah.
And then that just got easier. And then what I found was I was talking about it in ways I never thought I would. I was talking to friends who I've known for years and saying I've been raped. These were friends who for years had never known what was wrong with me in terms of I would act strangely or differently, or
But they wouldn't have any idea why. Or,
no.
Yeah.
No. And I've been an addict at parts of my life. I was in prison at parts of my life. I was in prison abroad. So my time in prison was well documented. It was in the papers and people knew about it. So I had that was out there. I couldn't own that narrative. It was out there, and it was an incorrect narrative. The one narrative I could keep to myself was the abuse I suffered as a teenager. And I wanted to keep that within me. I didn't want to let that out because once I let that out, people will change it. They will change it to what they want it to be.
Have a life of its own.
Yeah, but then in the safe room, I found that, no, it is up to me to own that narrative, and it is up to me. And I'm not saying it's for everyone, but for me, it was really important that I owned it, and I owned it in everything it was. And ultimately what it was multiple rape. And ultimately what it was me having to say that in order for people to understand exactly, okay, this is why.
Yeah.
All these questions people had about me, this is why.
Yeah.
And I started to make sense. I was asked a question when I first came here, and I was being assessed.
Yeah.
What do you want? What is your goal out of accessing We Are Survivors? And I said, I just want to make sense to myself. And when you break your silence and when you talk about what happened, that's what happens. You slowly start to make sense. And when you start to make sense to yourself, then hopefully you will also make sense to others. And for your loved ones who struggle around that, sitting around someone and they're not quite sure why they're upset or why they're triggered or why they're angry, or why they're overtly happy, and all these different emotions. Suddenly, if you start to make sense to those people, then the love they have for you becomes stronger.
Yeah.
And everything around you becomes more stable.
There's a kind of a forgiveness in being able to understand someone. So, for example, if you are a partner to someone who's a survivor and they might behave in certain ways or be really closed off in certain ways, like physical affection, that barrier there, suddenly it stops being personal and you can understand it. And once you know something, when you can call it a name, once the monster under your bed has got a face to it and you know when it comes out, you can learn to live around it and learn to live not because of it, but perhaps in spite of it. I feel like there's strength there. Yeah. Do you feel like you've gained in a measure of a way a kind of strength or confidence about yourself because you've been able to process and name these emotions? Has it given you a sort of a new lease or a new perspective?
Yeah, I have confidence I never had. I have a lot of, I don't sort of believe in regrets, but I wish I felt about myself, how I feel about myself now. I wish I'd felt like that in years gone by.
At an earlier time, yeah.
I feel like a lot of my life, I've despised myself so unjustly.
Yeah.
But when you despise yourself, you allow things to happen to yourself. You place yourself in positions and situations that you wouldn't normally put yourself into.
Because you don't want to protect yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And you feel deserving of pain. You feel deserving of shame. You feel deserving of people who aren't going to treat you well because that's what's happened before and you feel that's what you deserve.
And you're not treating yourself well, so the language they might use or the way they might treat you is just going to align with your own internal view of the self.
Yeah, and
to an extent.
When you're in control of pain that's happening now, it diminishes the pain that happened before, or it erases it for that time being. So when you're when your brain is full of pain and because of things that have happened in your past, you don't have any control over that. But if you can place yourself in a position and control that pain, whether that's self-harm, like direct, whether that's going up to people and annoying them or insulting them so much that they hit you, whether that's being in a relationship where someone is abusing you, whether that's being an addict, whether that's, gambling, whatever it is, you're sort of in control of that at that time. And what that does is it means you're in control of the pain.
Yeah.
I find that anyway. I can only speak for myself, and that's certainly what I think my experience has been.
That the most important place of a space like this is that you own the words you say, that they are yours, and you are an expert on your own experience is always my understanding. So your anecdotal experiences, that is your truth, right? Well, firstly, I want to thank Christopher for being in conversation with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Please do not go anywhere. I would love it if you would stick around to discuss the news, have a look at some of our activities, and then talk more about some letters that we've received recently from our clients. So it's time for our new segment. We are going to focus in on the issues that surround survivorship outside of this space. And that sometimes might be legislative changes, that might be new breaking stories or stories from survivors sharing their stories. Today, actually, I want to talk about something that's kind of tangential to survivorship and that really talks about storytelling as a form of processing trauma. And that is an article by Noah Davis in the Phoenix News. So the article is called Narrative Therapy, Palestinian Storytelling Through Poetry. It's in the Phoenix News and it's by Noah Davis. Now, I loved reading this article. There's some really, really beautiful is a difficult word to use here. Beautiful as in painful and honest poems in there about the raw experiences of pain and helplessness. But the article itself really touches on something that I know is very close to your art, and that is the role of storytelling within our community spaces and also as part of a healing journey. There's a particular quote that I focused in on, and this was in discussion with Haneen, who is a Palestinian student. It's through things like writing and art that we can amplify our ideas of who we are more clearly and more eloquently in ways that hopefully the world will listen to. And you are actually someone who is involved in writing yourself outside of this space. You are a recently published short story artist, I suppose.
I am.
Which you are allowed to be very, very proud of.
I am.
But beyond that, writing and conveying words in a certain way, getting your truth down on paper, there's something about it that makes it feel more real. It's kind of like a concrete reminder. Sometimes it feels necessary, at least from my instincts, that by saying a sentence out loud, it becomes more real. Do you know what I mean by that? You process it in a different way.
Absolutely. And sometimes we can't say words. And so however we get them down on paper, whether that's recording your own voice, having it transcribed, writing it yourself, typing it out, whatever. However we do that sometimes allows us to be able to say those words or have someone else read them. Also, it is really, really powerful when you can shine a light on the beauty in trauma and you can shine a light on sparks of light and that little diamond that's shining within a really dark environment, because there is always beauty within trauma. If you look hard enough for it, there will always be a tale of you being in your worst possible place and something really lovely happening or something kind happening that you generally wouldn't notice, but you notice kindness when that's the complete opposite of what you normally see. And I think when you write, you can also reframe things. You can write about truth, but in a way that maybe makes your wishes come true, because maybe the ending you change slightly into the ending you always wished it would be. And that doesn't mean to say that then you believe that's exactly what happened and it takes away the pain. Not at all. But we live in a society that doesn't want to talk about trauma. We live in a society that doesn't want to talk about all those dark things that people say, oh, no, I want something uplifting. I want something that's going to make me smile. I want something that's going to do this, that, the other. Actually, you want something that's going to punch you in the stomach and then make you feel emotion and make you feel lighter even though what you've read is actually quite dark. And there are lots of ways you can do that. And I think I recently wrote the stories where it's called The Monster Under the Bed, and it is a wish I had as a boy, and it's a wish that will never ever come true. But I got to write it down, and I got to make it true on the 6 pages that it lasts. And every time I read it, that wish comes true. And it's a very dark tale. But there are lines in that anyone who has experienced abuse will love, I think, and will adore, will embrace and say, that person gets it. And when you read that as a survivor of any type of trauma, when you read someone else who has written about their own trauma, and you say the words in your head, they get it, when you know that they get it, you'll just feel less alone.
There's something to be said there as well. You talked about being able to share your story, but wondering and fearing that when you did, you would lose control over it. But here you are sharing your story in a way where you have chosen the outcome. You've chosen how you want to engage with it.
Yeah. And, I was in prison for a while. I wrote an audio drama about my father in a hospice dying. It was his last night. That's all really dark. But I wrote about a conversation about how he supported me when I was in prison and how he got people to write to me. And it's and I know that I wrote it and I'm patting myself on the back, but, I've not written, I was in prison and this and that and that. I've written a story about compassion and the love of a parent for their child and how a parent supports someone when they're at their lowest ebb and they can't really do anything to help them escape that situation. But what they can try and do is make that situation less painful while they're in it. And it's a really beautiful tale about, it's just beautiful. And when people hear it, they cry and they go, oh my God, I can now envisage love. Whereas actually the story is about prison. And I think when you write about trauma, when survivors together actively write about things that happen to them, not only do they feel that bond and not only do those stories cement those people together, and those people will then remember each other because of those stories. So that's the guy who wrote that tale about that purple monster, or that's the guy who wrote that tale about that rainbow, or whatever it is. You'll link the story with the person. But you'll also feel an affinity with that person, and you'll think, well, if that person can do that, maybe I can do that. But maybe you won't do it in words. Maybe you'll do it in paint. Maybe you'll do it with a pencil. Maybe you'll just sketch something. Maybe you'll video yourself.
Yeah, you found the medium that allows you to convey what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's a very, very natural segue that I couldn't have planned better myself into our next section, which is the activity spotlight. Now, this is where we shine a lens, shall we say, onto one of these spaces or initiatives that we run here at We Are Survivors. Very, very naturally, I want to now talk about the writing room. Now, the writing room is, from an outside perspective, a space where survivors can share their stories. They bring in poems or written recollections or, anything they've really written at all. It could be a song. But the writing room is more than a vessel for storytelling or a place for people to practice their written craft. It is really that space that you're talking about. It is that way to connect with others. Sometimes I feel like the most powerful thing you can ever hear is in someone else's words of advice that you wish you could say to yourself. Someone else says something in a different tone or a different medium that it kind of slips past all of your guard or all of your preconceptions, and it talks right to a part of yourself that wants to hear it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. And I think we've all seen films or TV shows or read books that speak to us and that hit that spot that we didn't even know we had, and it's like, oh, okay, you have that sort of light bulb moment, and I think with storytelling, we don't realize the power of creativity, and a lot of people feel they're not creative. A lot of people will start with saying, oh, I was rubbish at art at school. Oh, I can't spell. I mean, the amount of times I hear I can't spell. I don't care if you can spell. It isn't important if you can spell. Grammar, I'm sorry to say, not that important.
We can do without.
No, some of the greatest storytellers in the world are people who could not spell, are people who didn't know the first thing about grammar, are people who didn't necessarily excel at school, and yet they have these stories and just a knack of telling them in a certain way. And I think people look at people who've excelled at school and they say, okay, they're good for the job because look, they've got their A levels and they've got their O level, GCSEs and sorry to show my age, their GCSEs and their A levels, and they've gone to university and things like that. But I think people who've suffered trauma have got a master's degree in life and experience, and they've got a wealth of knowledge that they don't want to have and that they wish they could get rid themselves of, but they've got that knowledge and they've got that experience.
So use it.
So use it. And how better to teach others how to navigate the world than from somebody who's had to do that under the most dangerous and terrifying of circumstances.
My instinct is that all stories ultimately, and the reason why we like our plot twists or the reason why we like a narrative thread, is all stories about connections. If we feel smart when we form a connection between some imagery and what's going on in a character's head and so on and so forth. The traumatized brain is no stranger to making connections in interesting places. I think that as survivors, I certainly find there's a strength in being emotionally vulnerable, emotionally honest. Sometimes the vocabulary is not quite there, but there's a feeling and there's something that's demanding to be conveyed. And if you can find a way to put that out onto a page and someone is able to make their own connection with your story, there's nothing more powerful.
No. And, you look at something like Baby Reindeer and Richard Gadd, and I'm not going to speak for Richard Gadd, but Richard Gadd is a survivor, and I think and he has managed to create and write this incredible story that shows many of the different facets of survivorship. And speaks to so many people on so many different levels. How many other survivors are there out there? And Richard Gadd at one point will have probably, even though I don't want to speak for him, thought, I'm not going to be able to tell that story. I'm a survivor and I'm struggling. How many survivors are sat there at home struggling, thinking that they're never going to amount to anything, that they're not able to do anything, that all their potential has been sapped from them? How many of those people have that same ability because they've got that knowledge within their head, because they've got that experience? And I think what Baby Reindeer has highlighted is that the darkest and most terrible of stories, when told properly and when told with real authenticity, can speak to the masses. I mean, it is the story that most people this year have spoken about.
It's been a lighthouse.
Absolutely. And yet it's a subject that no one wants to speak about.
Funny
and
how
that's
that works.
A story in itself.
Yeah. And if I wanted to get involved in the writing room, if I wanted to start joining, what should I expect? And should I send in my stories? Should I?
Yeah, absolutely. Send in your stories. Email them to us. community@wearesurvivors.org.uk. Or any of the emails that you find on the website, but community@wearesurvivors.org.uk.
That's the best one, definitely.
Yeah, in the subject matter, just put some creative writing or my writing, or put your name if you want to, or you can leave it anonymous. If you want us to try and upload it onto our website, let us know that. But what we're going to try and do is collate an album of different types of creative writing.
Fantastic.
Whether it's poetry, whether it's prose, whether it's short stories, whether you want to record a short form audio drama, whether you want to do a screenplay, whatever it is, whether it's just 2 lines, send it in. And if you want to start joining the writing room, then do get in touch with us at community@wearesurvivors.org.uk and let us know that.
And as always, one of the best ways to keep on top of our calendar is to ask to join our mailing list. But beyond that, our website always has a copy of the calendar available. Failing that, just call in. We're always very, very happy to take a call, ask to speak to a member of the community development team, such as Christopher or myself, and we'll get you involved right away. So up next is our letters segment. Now, this is where we hear from you. We hear your stories, we hear your questions, whatever you want to send in to us. The best way to do that is by the hashtag #BreakTheSilence on Instagram and X. But failing that, you're always free to email us via community@wearesurvivors.org.uk. So today, I've actually got a really, really interesting question that's kind of perfect for you. This comes from the staff at 42nd Street. Thank you so much for getting in touch. And this is, how do your safe rooms work and why?
Okay, so our safe rooms are safe. That is the most important thing. They're an analogy I used, so when I was in recovery, when I was desperate and when I needed support and I didn't quite know what type of support I needed or what I needed, and it was a huge, long waiting list for therapy. And survivorship is literally like being on a train, and sometimes you're in a carriage with people you hate, sometimes you're in a carriage with people you love, and sometimes you're in a carriage with people you hate and you love, and sometimes you're going up a hill and down a hill, and sometimes you're in a really dark tunnel, but you can never get off that train. And you know you can never get off that train, and you can never, ever take a breather from it. And you never know what tomorrow's going to bring. And you always hope tomorrow will be better than today. And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And when I started to access the safe room, which is every 2 weeks and it's for 2 hours, when I started to access the safe room, it was like still being on that train. But every 2 weeks, that train pulled into a station. I got off on a platform. I got to chat and listen to other survivors. I got to take a deep breath. And then I got back on that train, and it wasn't as scary because I knew in 2 weeks' time it would pull back into that station and I could get off it again.
Fantastic.
And that is how the safe room was for me. And I used to turn up for every 2 weeks, and there'd be a facilitator present to make sure that everything ran smoothly. There are rules in place which are easy to follow rules, but
they're not overbearing.
No, they're not. And it's peer-to-peer support. So it is the space of the survivors. It is their space, which we facilitate. And one person speaks at once, no one interrupts. We start off with a check-in, very simple. You speak for no more than a minute, 2 minutes. You say your name and how the last 2 weeks has been. Or you just say your name. You don't actually have to say any more than that.
No.
And then there's chat for about another 50 minutes. We have a short break. Chat for another 50 minutes, then we have a checkout. And people come back and come back and come back to them. And it has been proven through our data that people who those clients who actively engage in the safe room are more likely to actively engage in therapy.
Yeah.
And when I mean actively engage, I mean start therapy and then finish therapy.
the lot. Yeah.
Finish the lot. Also, what the safe room does brilliantly is it allows discussion to take place that mean that the types of discussion you're not normally used to. And when it gets to therapy, if you're on the waiting list for that, you're used to those discussions, so you're less apprehensive about them, and you don't even realize that's happened. And
your walls are down.
Yeah, so you're more likely to start talking about those things without being afraid of them. But also, it just means you don't feel as much alone as you normally feel. And you enter that safe room, hopefully, heavier than when you leave, and when you leave lighter than when you arrived. And you feel this connection with other people of different walks of life, different ages, but who have all experienced abuse.
Yeah.
And you don't have to talk about it if you don't want. And it's not talking about abuse for 2 hours at all. People share their stories. They share their histories, yes, of course, and it is a safe space to do it. But we champion success just as much as we support people who are struggling.
Yeah.
And it's a really important thing that people, when they enter there, they're able to see people at different stages in their journey.
Yeah, they're down the timeline.
Yeah.
Someone's been there for 2 years. It's their first session tonight.
Yeah, you see someone who was doing terribly a month ago is now doing really well.
Yeah.
And that gives you hope. And the safe room, that's what it gives people, is hope. And we run the safe rooms. We run quite a few of them. We have 3 face-to-face ones, and we have 2 that are online for those people who can't get here in person. And I don't want to say the word successful, and I don't want to say, they're a beautiful space.
No,
and the rest
say
of
it. Back yourself.
They're really powerful
work.
Spaces, and they work. And there are many, many clients who have been apprehensive about joining the safe rooms who are then really glad that they have.
Yeah.
And also, you can try, and if it's not for you, it's not for you. But at least you've done something. It sounds harsh saying that, because it's like you're saying to people who haven't that they're doing something wrong, and they're not. But once you're in a space where you want to do, where you feel ready and you feel the time is right for you to be able to do something, I would say do something.
Yeah.
And if that's joining the safe room, you may find that is really, really beneficial for your recovery.
I feel like anyone who's on a stage towards changing and improving their lives, don't let fear of failure become fear of trying.
No.
Yeah. I want to finish today's letter segment by reading out a letter. This is a story from one of our clients who's talking about their experience engaging over the years and where they are now because of it. I sought help in 2004 and met Duncan Craig, who was my therapist on Canal Street. I'm so happy as I've just seen him here from all that time ago. 20 years, that's how long it's taken me to come to Diva City and We Are Survivors. I cannot be thankful enough. This place has saved me. I'd be suffering, traumatized, paranoid, scared, and petrified without this place. There is nothing... The best part about being part of the community team here is that when someone steps in to our doors, we are there rooting for them the entire time. Like, we go the distance with them. Their whole journey, it might be through our ISVA service, which might be supporting them with some court assistance, or it might be they're waiting for therapy. But community has always got their back. We always get to listen to their successes and we celebrate them with them. Just hearing a story like that, someone saying, hey, my journey's been 20 years, but now I'm finally at a place where I feel safe and now I'm seeing changes. There's just nothing more powerful than that.
No, there isn't. And that's one of many.
Yeah.
The greatest part, the best part of our job is when we see clients who no longer need us.
Yeah. That sounds strange. Not that we don't want to see you around,
no.
But hey.
But when you no longer need us, because that's the place any survivor wants to be.
Yeah.
They want to be in that space where they no longer need support.
Yeah. I love seeing the transition that someone might go through as a survivor, where they first come in and they're really, really needing others. And then when they come in 2 years, 3 years down the line, and they start being that person who makes someone a coffee and sits down with them, and forget the other members of staff. The greatest strength of this place will always be learning from your other survivors who have been on this journey with you.
Yeah. And realizing that asking for help is one of the strongest things you can do.
Yeah.
A lot of us feel that there's a sign of weakness, that somehow that's not masculine. But actually, once you've asked for that help and reached out and you've received that help, it can really take you places.
Yeah. There's no strength in failing to acknowledge a need. If you're really, really, really hungry, there's nothing powerful about not eating a sandwich. You can have the sandwich. Yeah.
Thank you.
Talk about it. I don't have a sandwich for you. No, it would be vegetarian anyway.
Okay.
Yeah, and probably half price, and I might have sat on it on the way into work. So
yeah.
But yeah, go and have the sandwich. Acknowledge the need. Talk to us about it. And once you've found your secret, once you've found the way that it works for you, your way forward, share it with someone else.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is all for today on Beyond the Silence. First of all, thank you so much to my wonderful guest, Christopher. It's really, really been a pleasure having you here.
Thank you.
Now, before we send you off into the wilds, is there one thing you would like to share with all of the survivors listening today?
Yeah. We're told a lot that we're broken as survivors, and we're made to feel like we're broken. And often we tell ourselves that, and we're not. And for a long time, I thought I was broken.
Yeah.
But we're not broken. We may feel broken, and we may feel downtrodden, and we may feel like there's no hope and there's no way forward and all the rest of it. But for many, many decades, hundreds of years, there was no support for survivors out there, and now there is. And while there isn't a lot of support for survivors, the support is there. And once you start getting that support, you realise how strong you are, and those things you thought broke you are the things that give you strength. So I would like to end on that. Don't let anyone tell you you're broken, because you're not.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us today as well. Remember, if you or someone else in your life is a survivor and needs our support, do not hesitate to reach out. The easiest way is by phone. You can always ask to speak to a member of the community development team if you want to see one of our lovely selves. But guess what? The whole staff team is very, very nice as well. All of the good information you need is available in the description of this podcast, but also on our website. So please do not hesitate to reach out. And if you have a story you want to share or a question you want to ask some of our expert guests, send it in. The best way to do that is either via community@wearesurvivors.org.uk or via the hashtag #BreakTheSilence on Instagram or X. This has been Beyond the Silence. I've been your host, George. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you very, very soon. So, from our safe space to yours, goodbye.